Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen nabiyyina Muhammadi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Fiqhour. I know it's been a while. I've been exceptionally busy, and had it not been for our esteemed colleague from Wolfram Uthman, then this wouldn't have happened either, because he reminded me. So my sincere apologies. You get busy, you know what life's like. And also, like I said, because it didn't seem that there was a great appetite for the live sessions, then you can imagine it sort of falls down the pecking order of things to do, and other things take a priority. But because the questions were piling up, then what I thought was I would run a session this time round in order to go through those questions. And when I go through those questions, inshallah, then if there is any more, we will deal with that. So let's jump onto the questions straight away. The first question, let me go across to the gents group first. This is the Markaz al-Ifta wal Qāḍī gents group. So the question was, I think that was the last question that we've had that I've not answered. Yes, it is. Okay, so the question was, there is a chocolate called Lindt Marque de Champagne. It contains 2.1% alcohol. Is it permissible to consume? Well, I think that's quite obvious that it is not permissible to consume. Clearly, it has alcohol in it, and it is called Marque de Champagne. So there's lots of red flags to avoid it. So no, it is not permissible to consume chocolate which has 2.1% alcohol in it. The next question was, is it permissible for a Muslim to marry people from the scripture, like the Jews and the Christians? Okay, so I have answered this previously, probably within Fiqhour or generally speaking as well. Now, we have obviously guidance from the Quran, which permits the marriage between what's referred to as Ahlul Kitab and the Muslim men. This is obviously specific to Muslim men. And when we explore the rationale for that, we see obviously that even though the Jewish folk, the Jewish women and the Christian women, even though obviously the Judaic faith had changed somewhat from initial revelation, and similarly the Christian religion had changed somewhat from the original revelation, they conducted or still conducted ritual acts. So they were still Christian in faith or Christian in belief. And also the Jewish people were Jewish in faith and Jewish in belief and Jewish in actions. So it was not a nominal, a bit like now we find, you know, people who are nominally Muslim. They're Muslim by name. Sometimes we use that phrase, but the Aqidah is something which is against Islamic beliefs, and their practices are far away. So it begs the question, is nikah valid with somebody like that? But let's park that up for now. Let's just focus on the question at hand, which is in reference to Jewish women and Christian women. So even the Sahaba, really, on whom some in particular, would take issue with that, and they would say that actually, you know, when it comes to the Christian women, especially, we do not find anyone more idolatrous than Christians, for the very reason that the cross is something that they carry around as omens, or carry around like a sort of a minor, a small idol. Like an amulet. And similarly, when you go into a church, you will see statues of Mary, and you will see statues of Jesus, and you will see the cross with Jesus on the cross. So there was many Sahaba who would consider the Christian faith to be literally idolatry. So they would have issue with marrying Christian women. Obviously, they are fuqaha. The Sahaba were fuqaha, meaning that they could interpret verses directly. And they felt that those verses applied particularly to an earlier stage, and all those sects within Christianity and those sects within Judaism that still had some connection with the original faith, and they had not brought idolatry in or anything of that nature. But when we take a position amongst the schools, then amongst the schools, it is quite clear that this was something which was permitted for men to marry women. And the reason why is because the home was built usually on the man being the sort of a patriarchal system that we have within the family setup, and the woman would accept the sort of the faith of her husband. And that's why you find that the Sharia does not permit a woman to marry a Christian man, a Muslim woman to marry a Christian man. It does not permit a Muslim woman to marry a Jewish man because of this patriarchal society, which would mean, or the patriarchal system, which would mean that the husband, the father, would influence the upbringing of the children. So the children would grow up as Muslims. It wouldn't be that the children would grow up half as Christians and half as Muslims. So in essence, the faith of the woman would just be her own independent faith, not having any impact on the children whatsoever. And similarly, the faith would be such that her practice would be, in terms of her worship, would be such that it wouldn't be pushing towards idolatry. Similarly, when we started to see the Muslims moving outside of the Arabian Peninsula and moving towards the West in particular, then we saw that Muslim men were primarily marrying Christian women and Jewish women and abandoning Muslim women. So there was a hukam, a fatwa given. This was amongst the tabi'in, whereby it was forbidden to do so because of the fact that men were refraining from marrying Muslim women. We now find ourselves obviously in the 21st century, particularly here in the West, where Muslims are a minority. And therefore, to establish the faith and the beliefs and the practices of children in a minority context is even more so difficult, especially if one of the parents is from the majority country. So in essence, what we're saying here, that Muslims are a 5% minority. So if a Muslim man marries say a Christian woman or a Jewish woman, first, how Christian is she? How Jewish is she? Because we find now Christianity is a dying religion. Even unfortunately in certain circles within the Muslim community, it's now a dying faith where people are just nominally Christian with no understanding whatsoever. They may have been baptized as babies, but they have no association with their faith whatsoever. They don't go to church. The only time they do go to church is, for instance, when it is a christening, or when it is a wedding, or possibly when it's a funeral. Other than that, they don't go. We find similarly amongst the Muslims, where apart from the Jummah Salah, there's no association with their faith whatsoever, and even some that only go for funerals and only go if the nikah is being performed in the masjid. Other than that, they have no link whatsoever to their faith. So similar to the sort of changes we see in the Christian faith and the Jewish faith, we're starting to see those changes also within the Islamic faith as well. So if we are in this minority context, then if this man marries a Christian woman or a Jewish woman, remember, first of all, is she Christian in belief? Is she Jewish in belief? Or is she just somebody who comes from a family that were Christian, or she was baptized as a young baby? Or does this woman come from a family that were Jews, or they were said, oh, you are a Jew, but there was no practice whatsoever? And so that's one element. The second element is, if that person actually has those beliefs and has those practices, then the influence on the children is going to be significantly more towards the majority religion. And the majority religion, bearing in mind, is going to be either, which is now atheism, but if it's going to be a religion second to atheism, then it's going to be Christianity. So it will be very difficult then for the man, the Muslim man, to raise his children on the Islamic faith and continuously educating them on the Islamic faith when there will be a more potent and a more forceful, a greater sort of push towards Christianity more than Islam. So that's why you find yourself in these circumstances. The ulama will say that it is disliked. Some will go as far as saying it's makruh tahrim. It is disliked close to hurma. Some will just say it is disliked. Many of the time when we marry, unfortunately, when Muslim men marry, it's usually somebody that they've had relationships with prior to marriage. Then they realize that obviously I need to marry this woman now. I can't marry her because she's not Muslim. And they want to now obviously have her accepted by their family. The man wants her accepted in his family. So now he obviously needs to seek something to appease his family, appease his parents, appease his a wider family. So what he says is, oh, the Sharia permits me to marry a Christian woman. Well, you didn't marry her because she frequents a church or something. You're not marrying her because she frequents a synagogue. You married her because you met her in a nightclub, or you met her at work, or you met her somewhere else. And now, obviously, you've had a long-term relationship with her. Now, obviously, she wants some kind of commitment from you. So she's saying you need to marry me, but you're now realizing, oh, I can't marry you because not because of the fact that, oh, I'm Muslim and you're Christian, because if you thought that was wrong, there would be no illicit relationship between the two, but rather it is because you're thinking, well, you know, my family are not going to accept her. So I need a reason for her to be accepted. So this is where it's halal within Islam for a man to marry a Christian woman, or it's halal in Islam for a man to marry a Jewish woman. Well, is it halal for a man to be having relationships with a woman before nikah? No. So we kind of, you know, push Islam to one side there. We push Islam to one side there. But when it suits our mantra, when it suits what we want to do, then, you know, we use Islam as a sword. And if people sort of speak up against us, then we'll say, well, you know, you're backward, or you're, you know, you are against Islam, you're cultural, you know, all the rest of it, because Islam allows me. So I hope that's given a broader understanding of the question and the response, inshallah. We had another question that came in from the sisters group, which is here. So, Assalamu alaikum, inshallah you are well. Please answer the following question when you get a chance. Can you please explain what the reasoning is behind two female witnesses being the equivalent of one man's testimony? So we find in Surah Baqarah, I found it earlier, in which it mentions ayat number 228, which is now gone. No, sorry, not 228. I don't know where I got 228 from. It should be 282. Yeah, I got my numbers mixed up. So the verse is quite a long verse. Ya ba'da a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, or those of you who believe, idha tadayantum, that when you are loaning each other money, bidainin ila ajalin musamma, to a fixed time, faktubuhu, then write it down. Okay. وَلْيَكْتُبْ بَيْنَكُمْ كَاتِبٌ بِالْعَدْلِ. And because literacy was quite low in those days, then they said that a writer should write it for you, because obviously the two people who are transacting with this loan may not necessarily know how to write, and it needs to be recorded. So a writer should be brought, a scribe should be brought, and he should write it. But he shouldn't be unjust that, oh, that one's my cousin or he's my friend, so I'm going to write this in such a way that it favors my friend and doesn't favor my cousin. وَلَا يَأْبَ كَاتِبٌ أَن يَكْتُبَ كَمَا عَلَّمَهُ اللَّهُ فَلْيَكْتُبْ. And the writer, the scribe, he should not refuse that he writes, because this is a knowledge which Allah has given him, so he should write. So that shows literacy is a knowledge of Allah. So if, you know, those of us who are literate, alhamdulillah, those who are, we can speak well, we can write well, then this is a ni'mat from Allah. وَلْيُمْلِلِ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِ الْحَقُّ وَلْيَتَّقِ اللَّهَ رَبَّهُ وَلَا يَبْخَسْ مِنْهُ شَيْئًا. And then obviously those whose writer is, yani haq, he should dictate and he should fear Allah, his Rabb, and he should not try to, you know, take any of that money. فَإِنْ كَانَ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِ الْحَقُّ سَفِيهًا أَوْ ضَعِيفًا. If, on the other hand, the person whose right it is, he is unfortunately not the brightest bunny, or he is intellectually weak, or he doesn't have capacity to dictate, فَلْيُمْلِلْ وَلِيُّهُ بِالْعَدْلِ. Then his guardian should speak on his behalf. And this is the relevant part. وَاسْتَشْهِدُوا شَهِيدَيْنِ مِنْ رِجَالِكُمْ. And should bear witness to this testimony two men. فَإِنْ لَمْ يَكُونَا رَجُلَيْنِ. And if the two men aren't present, فَرَجُلٌ وَامْرَأَتَانِ مِمَّنْ تَرْضَوْنَ مِنَ الشُّهَدَاءِ. Then it should be one man and two women from those who please you from the witnesses. أَنْ تَضِلَّ إِحْدَاهُمَا. And explains why two female witnesses, that if one of them deviates or makes error, فَتُذَكِّرَ إِحْدَاهُمَا الْأُخْرَى. Then the other one will remind her that, oh, that's not what happened, that's not what was written. So the verse is quite clear. It explains clearly why the reason is for two female witnesses. Now, the question arises, is that always the case? No, that's not always the case. There are some cases where a single female witness is acceptable. There's also cases in which only a female witness will be allowed. So it's not as though there was some issue whereby it was decided that, oh, in all cases, there should be 2 female witnesses to 1 male witness. What was being written here was that in financial arrangements, whenever it comes to finance, whenever it comes to trade, then there should be 2 male witnesses that should give testimony. In the absence of 2 male witnesses, it should be 1 male and 2 female. Now, when it comes to financial transactions, remember, I just in the answer previously, I mentioned to you that society from an Islamic perspective is set on a patriarchal society. It's set on a male-dominated society. We have obviously the Amir of a tribe, that is a man. We have the Amir of the family, that is a man. So it's always structured in that way. Obviously, he shouldn't be a dictator, but we kind of, I don't want to go off on a tangent. I want to focus on this particular question, and I have other videos on this channel which discuss gender roles and how Islam sort of gives specific roles to the gender and why each gender has been created in a certain way based on their biology, based on the hormones that they have and the physicality that they have in order for them to deal with certain issues. And then the other gender has certain other qualities and attributes which are required for certain other issues. So when it comes to transactions, and usually men were involved in transactions, very rarely were women involved in transactions. We even know, for example, even though Sayyidina Khadija radiallahu anha was a successful businesswoman, she was actually more an investor. So what she would do, she was invest in people. So like, for example, the Prophet ﷺ, as a young man, she invested in him. She was the Rabbul Mal, so to speak. And she suggested, she gave a certain amount of wealth to the Prophet ﷺ to go and do business. And then obviously he would go, he would buy, fabric, spices, whatever it might be. And then he would sell that back in Mecca. And obviously he would make a profit from that. And then that profit would be shared between him and between Khadija radiallahu anha. And that's how obviously business was done. So whenever, and remember, this was at a time when women did not play a significant role in society either, where they tended to be not, publicly involved in these sorts of things. So that's how that verse is set. This makes it quite clear that this is how it should be arranged. Hope that clarifies that. Can you please elaborate on if there are more women in Jahannam than men? And if so, what the reason is for this? And see how women would avoid being part of the former. So there is a hadith that I will share with you, in which this hadith comes in Sahih al-Bukhari, in Kitab al-Iman, and it comes on Babu Kufran al-Ashir wa Kufri Duna Kufr. And it mentions حدثنا عبد الله بن مسلمة عن مالك عن زيد بن أسلم عن عطاء بن يسار عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أريت النار فإذا أكثر أهلها النساء. So the Prophet ﷺ says that Jahannam was shown to me. Okay, hellfire was shown to me. And he mentions then the majority, فَإِذَا أَكْثَرُ أَهْلِهَا النِّسَاء يَكْفُرْنَا. The majority of the dwellers of Jahannam were women who were yakfurna. Now this word yakfurna can mean several things, and this is the reason why it's brought in Kitabul Iman, because the word kufr means to disbelieve. So this word could mean because they do kufr, or it could also mean that they are ungrateful. So qila ayakfurna billah, do they disbelieve in Allah? Qala yakfurna al-ashir wa yakfurna al-ihsan, that they are ungrateful. Yani they are ungrateful to their husband. وَيَكْفُرْنَ الْإِحْسَانِ, they are ungrateful when favors are done for them. لَوْ أَحْسَنْتَ إِلَى إِحْدَاهُنَّ الدَّهْرَ, that if you were good to a person, if you were good to one of them for a long time, ثُمَّ رَأَتْ مِنْكَ شَيْئًا, and then if they saw something in you that they did not like, قالت, she will say, مَا رَأَيْتُ مِنْكَ خَيْرًا قَطُّ, you've never done anything good for me. Okay, you've never done anything good for me. So first, let's give this some context. This was taking place when there was a military expedition that was due to take place. And during that military expedition, there was a need to collect sadaqah. There was a need to collect money in order to support the expedition. So the Prophet ﷺ was encouraging the women to give wealth, give money in the path of Allah. So sometimes, quite stern words are used in order to encourage people. We are frightened of Jahannam. And because he was specifically speaking to the group of women, he was addressing the women in that way. Whereas when he speaks normally in the masjid, majority of the people he's addressing are men. And he mentions to the women that, look, you need to work extra hard. You need to work extra hard. You need to give more charity. And he mentions why. And he says, because you are ungrateful, because your husband, he marries you, you live in his house. Now, obviously, that dynamic is changing. Many women work now. Remember, this is a dynamic in which the women did not work. The women would be supported by their fathers. They would then marry their husbands, and the husbands would now support them. They would take the girl's, the woman's father's responsibility and now provide for them. So what they would do is they would have a house for her. They would buy clothes for her. They would give her food. They would make sure she's looked after. They would make sure that her health is looked after. They would make sure that if she has educational needs, that is provided. So they would provide all that from their own wealth. Okay. So, they mentioned that it costed about, I don't know, £200,000 or something to raise a child. They mentioned that, £200,000 for a child from the age of 0 up to the age of 18, 19, 20. That is nearly $250,000 it costs to raise a child. And then there's this conversation that how much does a child owe to the parent? So this is in particular in reference to a marriage. And a child obviously lives with a parent for 20 years. A marriage could be for 50 years. And there's no obligation on the woman to work. The obligation is on the man to work. So the man has to not only provide for himself, the man has to work in order to provide for his wife. So this woman comes in as a complete stranger to him. He marries her, and now he is responsible for all her costs for the next potentially 50 years. So therefore, this individual should be in a position of being grateful to that person who's now taken up this responsibility. Her father obviously had taken up that responsibility because she was his daughter. So there was a kind of a relationship obligation to do so. Her husband is of no relative of her. He has no obligation to do this. He's only doing it because of his needs from her, and she obviously has needs from him. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship that exists there. So to avoid this sort of thing, to avoid being of that group, one is obviously that there should be gratitude towards anybody who does this person a favor. Sometimes we have a habit in our communities where, someone sends us some food over and it's a very small plate with maybe only one meat piece in it and maybe one potato. And, you say in a kind of a flippant remark that, what are we supposed to do with this? There's 6 of us. There's only one meat piece. What are we supposed to do? Fight over this? And then there's only one potato. What are we supposed to do with this one potato? Are we supposed to share it between 6 of us? So instead of saying, Alhamdulillah, Jazakumullah khair, thank you, what a neighbor I have that, in a time of need, she thought about me and she sent this plate over. We have a habit, unfortunately, of sort of criticizing it rather than seeing the positive. So this is something which, particularly the Prophet is addressing women, that they should, whenever someone does a favor, they should be, grateful for that favor. And unfortunately, there's this habit that even if you are good all the time, it is the point where you do something wrong that a woman's fitrat would be she'll pick that mistake out more than she'll pick up all the times you're good. Now, obviously, these are generalizations. You can easily point this out in men. There's no doubt about that. That men, a woman could be every day she makes sure that her husband is looked after, he's well, there's always something cooked, there's always food in the fridge, there's always there. And then one day she has to on an emergency go out, and when she goes out she forgets to put the food in the microwave for him. So he comes in and makes a big issue of it, makes a big song and dance. Where's my food, this, that, and the other, whatever. Now, surely this man could, for one day, just go to the fridge, take the food out, warm it up in the microwave. He doesn't need his hand holding. So this could easily apply to men as well. So, but remember, whenever the Prophet ﷺ spoke, he spoke in general ways, okay, to generalize so that it could be applicable so everyone could take something from it. Um, can you explain what is meant by "and the male is not like the female" and the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ curses those who imitate the opposite gender, considering most people, regardless of gender, take on adult tasks, i.e., working, cooking, cleaning, parenting, etc. What is considered to be imitating the opposite gender? Okay, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned about the male is not like the female, this is in particular reference, if memory serves me well, after the birth of Maryam alayhi salatu wasalam, and how obviously her mother had made plans to dedicate the child that would be born, which she assumed to be a boy, to worship, because in society it is our boys who spend times, or men who spend time in worship, in solitude. So for example, i'tikaf, the men go for i'tikaf. On Jama, the men go. So this is something that she had hoped that when my child is born, that I will dedicate my child to the worship of Allah. And when I dedicate my child to the worship of Allah, then inshallah ta'ala, I will be able to gain the reward for my child being in worship. So that was her plan. But when she gave birth, a female child was born. Now she knows that female children did not become scholars. Female children did not become people who dedicated their lives to worship. It was males that did that. It was males who would stay in the masjid continuously. So now she had a dilemma that, what am I going to do? But obviously this woman, i.e. Maryam alayhi salatu, was going to be an unusual woman. She was going to be a woman that's, second to none. She was going to be this remarkable woman that would eventually become the mother of Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. So therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that the male is not like the female. And it would make more sense had he said that the female is not like the male. Okay. The female is not like the male. But instead, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the male is not like the female. So this is actually giving preference to the female over the male in this particular example, to saying that there are attributes in a female that the male does not have. Anyway, that's that. With regards to, the cursing of those who imitate the opposite gender, this is not in reference to working. This is not in reference to cooking or cleaning or parenting or anything like that. This is in reference to dressing like a woman, behaving like a woman, having characteristics like a woman, sitting amongst women. Obviously, from a male perspective, this is not wrong if you're a woman, but from a male perspective, it is taking characteristics of a woman. It's like, sitting with women, dressing like women, wanting to act like a woman, behave like a woman. So we have quite distinct, when I say we, in Islam, there are quite distinct gender roles, and there are quite distinct gender behavior, and there's quite distinct gender attributes. So we shouldn't feel bad if a woman has natural maternal instincts. It's not that the man should now develop maternal instincts and we say, oh, that's a nice man. I know the modern man should have maternal instincts. He doesn't, because he's not a mother. He was never created to be a mother. He was created to be a father. And likewise, the mother shouldn't have male characteristics. So she shouldn't have male behavior. She should not dress like a man. She should not sit amongst men. She should not think that she is a man. So that's why we have that. And I know we live in a time now where there's what we call gender fluidity, where there's, a person can sort of decide on what their gender is. So now we have this, I've used gender and sex interchangeably. Okay. I've used gender and sex interchangeably, but now we know that sex is your biological state and gender is what you have preference to describe yourself. And then obviously we have sexual orientation now, which is another level of identity. So it's getting quite complicated. Before, as when we were growing up, you just had one box to tick. It would just say sex, M or F, and you would tick that. Khalas, it was done. Now, obviously, when you're trying to fill a form out, when they're trying to, collate data, you're just trying to find out who you are is so complicated. I can only imagine how complicated this is for a child who is, growing up and trying to determine what they are, what they aren't. So this is what it's in reference to. Okay, there is no. The Prophet ﷺ used to stitch his own garments. He used to stitch his own clothes. He used to stitch his own shoes. He used to milk his own goat. He used to go shopping for himself. He never felt any job was beneath him. He would clean his own room. So there's not jobs for women in that cleaning is for women and cooking is for women. There's never been that sort of guidance. This is talking about behavior, dress, and roles of that nature. So for instance, if a child is born and the child is young, then it is the mother's role to be playing with the child. It's not that the mother should say, well, I'm going to go back to work. The child is only like 2-3 months old. I'm going to go back to work. I want you to look after the baby, because the baby doesn't want a father. The baby doesn't need a father. The baby does not understand what a father is. A father can't connect. Again, generalizations. The father can't connect with a child as the mother can connect with a child. We all know that. Even as grown men, in old age, we know the kind of relationship our mother gave us, and we know the kind of relationship our father gave us. So when you want certain type of feedback, you go to your mother, and when you want certain type of feedback, you go to your father. You never get confused as to where you should go, and that's because of their characteristics. So that's what this is in reference to. I often see that being used in red pill feminist rhetoric, and I've never really looked into the Islamic reasoning behind it. Thank you for your time, Jazakallah khair. That's not a problem. Assalamu alaikum. I pray you are well. Is car financing as described below permissible? Jazakallah khair for your time and efforts. Unfortunately, sister, I won't have time to go into each one because it takes a lot of time to check these things. So for instance, what you have to do is you have to look at the documentation, then you have to request contracts from them, then you have to go through all the contracts. This could take days. So unfortunately, unless you see my name attached to it, then I cannot say whether it is good, bad, or indifferent. Assalamu alaikum, du'as, you are well. We have a difference of opinion in our area regarding the reciting of Surah Yasin after one passes. What is the correct thing to do, please? Yes, one can absolutely recite Surah Yasin when someone passes. There's no harm with it whatsoever. Obviously, there are sometimes people who have you got to recite it 140 times or 114 times or whatever, or there is a khatam of Yasin. There is no khatam of Yasin, meaning that you recite Yasin X number of times and it's considered as a khatam. It doesn't work like that. Rather, the way it works is that you can recite Yasin for as much as you like. One shouldn't gather people. So there's issues with that. But if I focus just on the question, may you recite Surah Yasin? Yes, you may. That's all the questions from that group. Okay, then I know some came to me via WhatsApp. So where is it from? WhatsApp. There you are. So the first question is, so after these questions, I'm done. So if you do have questions, please put them on the chat and then I'll answer them. Question: if a deceased Muslim leaves a will specifying that their estate should be distributed according to English law, and the distribution is carried out in accordance with that law, the beneficiaries could include both Muslims and non-Muslims. For the Muslim beneficiaries, is it obligatory for them to redistribute their received shares according to Islamic law, even though they are not the executors and they received it from the deceased as part of the execution of a will? What should one do in this situation in terms of what is Islamically binding? So basically, the inheritors have a choice. The inheritors could decide amongst themselves that we are happy with this distribution. And because each person has a haqq, and it could be that somebody has more than they should have got, and somebody's got less than they should have got. But if they all concur that that's fine, there's no problem. I know I should have got X amount, but I got Y. And the other person says, yes, I know I should have got A amount, but I got B, but it's all good. We've got no issues. Then that's absolutely fine. If, however, the person who got less, who should have got more, has an issue and says, look, actually, I'm a male child. I should have got 2 shares. And everyone's got it equally. So my sister has got, should have got 1 share. She's also got 2 shares. So it's not fair. I want my share. And I'll answer the question. And people might say, well, why is there this unfair distribution, unequal distribution? Again, that goes back to my answer earlier, which is that the man is responsible for providing for his wife and his children, whereas a woman is not responsible for providing for a son and her, for a husband and her children. So therefore, if a man receives £2,000, let's just say he receives twice as much as his sister. So a man receives 10,000 and his sister receives 5,000. And people think, well, that's not really fair. Why has he got twice as much? Well, the man has got a wife and 3 children, and his sister has got a husband and 3 children. So the husband is going to share 10,000 between 5 people, his wife and his 3 children. So he ends up with 2,000. Whereas his sister is not going to share it with her husband and with 3 children. So she ends up with 5,000. So in fact, she's actually got more than him. Okay, so we need to understand it from that perspective. We need to understand it, rights associated with responsibilities, not just rights alone. They don't stand alone. So if that is the case, then yes, it is compulsory upon them to redistribute it according to the Sharia, because now that they can fix that problem, they are required by the Sharia to fix that problem. They are not, they cannot just blindly say, oh, well, they did it. What can we do? Of course you can do it. You can now send that money back, give it to the other person. And the last question before we disappear, Islamically, is there any issue in cutting down a tree in one's own garden? As culturally, there are some do's and don'ts. Some say there are jinns that may inhabit the tree and can cause jinn issues. Is there any particular procedure to follow? What should a Muslim believe in such circumstances? Should we believe in such things or just cut trees if one needs to? Some people from experience have been affected by jinns in this scenario and hence scared the same will happen to them if they cut the tree. How can one safeguard oneself before cutting trees? There is no issue with regards to cutting a tree. Cutting a tree is just a standard thing, like, removing a wall or anything like that. Obviously, we shouldn't destroy living things. That's the first thing. So there is no need to cut down trees. There is no need to remove bushes. There's no need to remove something which is living and is an habitat for other creatures. Because, let's park jinn up on the side for now. There's birds that might be nesting in there. There'll be insects in there. There'll be all sorts. There'll be a whole habitat in there surviving in that tree. That tree will be their world. And if we just come along and chop it for the sake of chopping it, then we've caused harm to those animals that are in there. And obviously, we've just destroyed a living thing. If, however, that tree is detrimental to us, in that, there was a storm, for example, and the tree is a little bit, its foundations are a little bit weak, its roots are a little bit weak, and we get advice from the tree people who say that, look, you really need to get shut of that tree, because the next gust of wind is going to blow that tree straight into your house, and it could potentially damage your roof, and it's definitely going to smash windows and all the rest of it. Now you're pretty much left with little choice. So now you remove the tree. Or it could be for some other reason. You're trying to landscape your garden because you want a place for the kids to play or something like that, and there's this huge tree in the way, and you prefer to remove it because the children are falling over it or something like that. Meaning there's this reasonable need to do so. Then yes, you can do so. There is no reason we should think jinn aren't really going to be hanging about in somebody's tree in their garden, let's say. Where they're going to be is in quiet places where there's nobody around. They don't like to be disturbed. They're not really happy in, being in the bottom of your garden. Unless obviously you're a wealthy person, you have a huge estate and you have acres of land. That's a different thing altogether. But if I'm thinking that we're a normal person who's got like about 1.5 meters, 2 meters of garden square, then really they're not going to be somewhere like that. They're going to be out of the way, graveyards, quiet places, and things of that nature. So there will be no harm whatsoever if somebody cut that tree down. Okay, so that brings me to the end of all my questions that I've received over the last few weeks. Inshallah, I may be back next week, but the thing is, it really depends on the question. So please put your questions on the Markaz al-Ifta wal Qāḍī groups, and once the questions are of a sizable nature, which will justify me taking out an hour or so of my time to go through them, then I'll jump on. I know there's been people watching, but no questions have come up live. So had I just come on live, there would have been no questions for me to answer. And at the end of the day, I've got to value my time in order to make sure that I effectively use my 24 hours. So on that point, we can say goodbye to each other and give salam to each other. So wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.